This is the time and place for the hearing to determine whether to issue an order finding waste, unreasonable use, unreasonable method of use, or unreasonable method of diversion of water, and ordering corrective actions against Douglas and Heidi Cole and Marble Mountain Ranch. The draft order finding waste, unreasonable method of use, and unreasonable method of diversion of water and ordering corrective actions was issued by the Assistant Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights on August 30th, 2016. I'm Stephen Moore, Vice Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. I'll be assisted by Staff Counsel Lily Weaver, Staff Environmental Scientist Mmr Am, Staff Engineer Gene McHugh, and we also have other staff assisting us today, Connie Mitterhofer, Jane Farwell Jensen, Michael Buckman, and of course our esteemed court reporter. Evacuation procedure. Before we get started, please look around the room, identify the nearest exit. I know this is probably the best exit route to get out of the building. And in the event of a fire alarm, we're all required to evacuate this room immediately. So please take your valuables and exit the building. And our evacuation location is in the parking lot in front of the building. The hearing is being held in accordance with the notice of public hearing dated June 9th, 2017, and the revised notice of public hearing dated August 16th, 2017. The purpose of this hearing is to afford the parties to this proceeding an opportunity to present relevant oral testimony and other evidence which address the following noticed two key issues. And we'll be circling back to these issues over and over again to make sure that we're centered in our discussions. Number one, does the past or current diversion or use of water by Douglas and Heidi Cole and Marble Mountain Ranch constitute a waste, unreasonable use, unreasonable method of use, or unreasonable method of diversion of water, particularly in light of any impacts to public trust resources? That's number one. Number two, if the past or current diversion or use of water by Douglas and Heidi Cole and Marble Mountain Ranch constitutes a waste, unreasonable use, unreasonable method of use, or unreasonable method of diversion of water, what corrective actions, if any, should be implemented? And with what time schedule should they be implemented? How should the implementation time schedule for any corrective actions be coordinated with the requirements of the cleanup and abatement order issued by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board? So those are the two issues. I'm sure we'll have a chance to reiterate them. I wanted to let everyone know we are broadcasting this hearing on the internet and recording both audio and video. In addition, our court reporter is present to prepare a transcript of this proceeding. Anyone who would like an expedited copy of the transcript must make separate arrangements with the court reporter. To assist the court reporter, please provide him with your business card. When you speak, please be sure to use a microphone so that everyone can hear you, here and in the recording. A maximum of 5 microphones may be on at once, and they must be turned on and off manually. Therefore, please take care to turn off the microphone you are using when you are finished speaking. And I'll try to also follow those rules. It's something that takes some getting used to, so we understand. Finally, please take a moment to turn off or mute your cell phones. Even if you think it's already off or muted, just take a quick moment to double check. See, I've got the orange on mine. And everyone appreciates that. Thank you very much. And so now we'll get into the explanation of the order of proceeding. And thanks to everybody for traveling here today. Everyone had to make some sacrifice to be here, and we all appreciate that. Before we begin the evidentiary portion of the hearing and hear from the parties who have submitted cases in chief, we'll hear from any speakers who are not designated parties but wish to make a non-evidentiary policy statement. Please note that all designated parties will have an opportunity to present an opening statement, even those parties that are not presenting direct testimony. Parties may include any policy-type statements during their opening statements. Is there anyone here who wishes to make a non-evidentiary policy statement? Please identify yourself. No policy statements? Okay. We will note for the record that no one here today has indicated that they wish to make a non-evidentiary policy statement, and we will move on to the evidentiary portion of the hearing for presentation of evidence and related cross-examination by parties who have submitted notices of intent to appear. So the hearing teams receive scheduling requests from multiple parties to the hearing. We appreciate the parties' efforts to coordinate. To accommodate these requests the best we can, we will deviate from the general order of the proceedings at times, particularly today and tomorrow. I will explain the general manner of proceeding first, and then how we will be deviating from it. We received a request to discuss the order of proceeding, and I will allow for a brief discussion shortly. But first, would Conrad Fisher from Old Man River Trust please come up to the microphone and explain the need to accommodate your witness, Phil Alpers, on this morning.
Here we go. So I have two witnesses. One is another person who has been, who is connected to the mouth of Stanshaw Creek, Phil Albers, who is here. The other was to talk about remedies. Phil can only be here today, and even if it means me not speaking, I would very much appreciate it if he could speak for 10 minutes. It's what he has to say is relevant, and it would be just 10 minutes. I, on the other hand, can be flexible and speak another day.
So we need some additional information to determine whether there's good cause to change the schedule. So can you tell us a little bit more about why he can only be here today?
So first, I thought this was resolved already. So we had a process where parties were said, please work it out. And this was one of my requests within that process. So until yesterday, I thought it was already resolved. The reason is your question? I have only, sorry?
That's correct.
I have only two witnesses. This is my most important witness. I followed the procedure to ask that he speak first, as it was explained to me.
Oh, that's fine. I think Ms. Weaver is pointing out is that we did get the correspondence. We have arranged a whole order of proceedings. For the record, we just wanted you to explain why we needed to change the schedule to accommodate Mr. Alpers.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the explanation. So the general order in which the parties will present their direct testimony and/or conduct cross-examination will be first, Division of Water Rights Prosecution Team, Kenneth Petrozelli. Second, Douglas and Heidi Cole, Marble Mountain Ranch, Barbara Brenner. Third, National Marine Fisheries Service, Christopher Kiefer. Fourth, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Stephen Puccini and Nathan Vogeli. Fifth, Karuk Tribe, Fatima Abbas and Drevitt Hunt. Sixth, Old Man River Trust, Conrad Fisher, Seventh, Klamath River Keeper, Paul Keibel. Eighth, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, Chris Schutz and Michael Jackson. And finally, ninth, Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and Institute for Fisheries Resources, Noah Oppenheim or Regina Chichazola. Okay. As I stated earlier, I will allow all the parties to make an opening statement. At the beginning of each case in chief, the party may make an opening statement. Opening statements should briefly summarize a party's position and, if applicable, what the party's evidence is intended to establish. Given that California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance and Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations and Institute for Fisheries Resources will not be providing direct testimony, we will hear their opening statements after conclusion of the direct testimony. So, clear? After a party's opening statement is presented, we will hear oral testimony from the party's witnesses. Before testifying, Witnesses should identify their written testimony as their own and affirm that it is true and correct. Witnesses should summarize the key points in their written testimony and should not read their written testimony into the record. Direct testimony of each party's witnesses will be followed by cross-examination from the other parties, board staff, and myself if it comes up. Redirect testimony and recross examination limited to the scope of the redirect testimony may be permitted. So that is, the recross examination is limited to the scope of the redirect testimony. After all cases in chief are completed, the parties may present rebuttal evidence. Parties are encouraged to be efficient when presenting their cases and their cross-examination. Except where I approve a variation, we will follow the procedures set forth in the board's regulations and in the hearing notices. The parties' presentations are subject to the following time limits. Opening statements are limited to 20 minutes per party. Oral presentations of direct testimony are limited to 1 hour total per party, 20 minutes per witness. Any cross-examination will be limited to no more than 1 hour per witness or panel of witnesses. Additional time may be allowed upon a showing of good cause. And in the interest of efficiency, all parties should take care to meet the time limits for direct testimony and cross-examination, particularly when all witnesses of a party are not presenting direct testimony and undergoing cross-examination as a panel. We will not be conducting oral closing arguments. An opportunity will be provided for submission of written closing briefs. I will set the briefing schedule at the close of the hearing. Given the scheduling requests we have received, it is foreseeable that we will only have an opportunity to hear from the following witnesses today. Joey Howard for the Division of Water Rights Prosecution Team, Steve Kramer for Marble Mountain Ranch, and Phil Alpers for Old Man River Trust. In light of the shifting schedule for presentations received, and in the interest of time, I will allow the prosecution team, Marble Mountain Ranch, and Old Man River Trust, if they wish, to reserve the remainder of their unused opening statement time today for when they present their remaining witnesses' testimony. So today, after the appearances of the parties, we will hear the prosecution team's opening statement, followed by oral direct testimony and cross-examination of their witness, Joey Howard. Following any potential redirect and recross of Mr. Howard, Marble Mountain Ranch will have an opportunity to present their opening statement. This will presumably take us into the afternoon. No earlier than 1 p.m., Marble Mountain Ranch witness Steve Kramer will provide oral direct testimony and will then be cross-examined. Following any potential redirect and recross of Mr. Kramer, Old Man River Trust will have an opportunity to present an opening statement, followed by the presentation of direct testimony by Phil Alpers with the potential for redirect and recross. As described in my October 31st, 2017 ruling letter, parties should be aware that witnesses will be compelled to return on Tuesday, November 14th, 2017, if necessary, to complete cross-examination. If witnesses fail to return to complete cross-examination, the board has discretion to entertain such motions as may be necessary to prevent prejudice to other parties. On Tuesday, we will complete any remaining cross-examination of these witnesses if necessary. We will then allow Klamath Riverkeeper to present its opening statement and direct testimony, after which we will resume the prosecution team and Marble Mountain Ranch's remaining cases in chief. That was an earful, I'm sure, for everybody. But we aim to accommodate the needs, especially with those who have traveled so far, and we want to be sensitive to folks' schedule, so we hope this accommodates folks to the best of our ability. This brings us into housekeeping. Would any parties like to discuss the order of proceeding I have just outlined? We do have somebody who would like to discuss this. Come up to the microphone, please, and identify yourself. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Drevitt Hunt. I'm here on behalf of Karuk Tribe. And one of our witnesses, Leif Hillman, has to travel to Colorado on Wednesday. So we were hoping that perhaps between the Klamath River Keeper and the resumption of the prosecution team's case, tomorrow we could present his testimony. And if necessary, because things aren't moving as quickly as possible, before the end of the day tomorrow to present his testimony. It shouldn't take too much time. It's not that lengthy.
Okay. I just want to make sure folks have an opportunity to object to this proposal if it causes any concern. And seeing no objections, I think we will do our best to figure out the scheduling and the sequence of witnesses to accommodate. What's the person's name again?
Leif Hillman.
Leif Hillman's scheduling constraints. So make a note of that, and
Okay.
I'll work with the hearing team to make sure that you have some certainty on when that will happen.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Please come forward. And please identify yourself. Thank you.
Kenneth Petrozelli for the prosecution team. The prosecution team would like to present the direct oral testimony from its witnesses starting out. This does present the foundation for the case, so it can most easily understood by everyone here. We have, for our prosecution team witnesses, they have presentations with exact amounts of budgeted time. Mr. Howard is an adverse witness, so his time is a little less exact. So it would be much easier for me to be able to present our main prosecution team witnesses first, and then Joey Howard with our remaining time.
Okay. Thanks for
Thank
the
you.
request. We're taking that into account here. I'm looking at the order of proceedings. And so I guess, Mr. Petrozelli, one question I have is, do you have a suggested time or in the sequence for Mr. Howard to be inserted?
So I was budgeting 10 minutes for him so we could stay within our hour. So I was trying to, my hope is that we can present direct oral testimony from all of our witnesses in an hour. And then if I need a bit of latitude with Mr. Howard, given his adverse nature, I would request that if necessary.
Okay. Let's confer, because it's a little different than our understanding coming in. Okay, thank you. Want to clarify here a little bit. On Friday, I believe we received this request for special scheduling and the order of witnesses, and so this request is not consistent with that request. Now, I understand the need to have a flow and everything, but actually we've gone to great lengths here to accommodate folks' schedule, and so flow is not the most important thing to us. The most important thing, because all of the requests that were made and our juggling to try to accommodate schedules, is to go with what the prosecution team requested in the first place, which was to have Mr. Howard go first. And we're growing a little impatient with all the different scheduling, because in order to accommodate your request, we're going to have all of the potential cross-examiners come up here and give us time estimates to meet the schedule that we're trying to meet today. So I would actually deny the request and go according to the script that we put together based on everybody's input. So is there any objections, comments on the proposed schedule? So one thing I want to make sure is Mr. Howard present? Is that you, Mr. Howard? Okay, thanks for coming down from Ashland. So let me get back on my script. So for the purpose of scheduling, this is a challenge. You heard there were 9 different parties, and we're trying to accommodate everybody's scheduling requests, you know, and we want to do that, but we don't want to have all these scheduling changes come out last minute like this. We're starting to get impatient. So in terms of the scheduling for today, I anticipate taking a lunch break of about 60 minutes each day. Please keep this in mind as we get closer to the afternoon. We'll be looking to find a natural breaking point. We don't really want to cut people's testimony in half in the name of a certain amount of flow to the schedule. On subsequent hearing days, we may begin earlier than 10 a.m. I'll announce any changes to the start time at the hearing at the end of the day. Each afternoon, we'll have a hard stop at 5 p.m., so plan on wrapping up each day around 4:45. Today, however, we will need to end at 4:30. If the hearing is still ongoing on Thursday, we will end early at 3:30 p.m. on Thursday. Please make a note of that. Today's 4:30, Thursday is 3:30, and the default time is 5 o'clock. Are there any other procedural issues that need to be addressed? Don't be shy, it's okay. You know, I'm just, the scheduling has been very challenging. Okay. So at this point, because we didn't have any proposed policy statements, no blue cards were submitted for policy statements. Now I will invite appearances by the parties who are participating in the evidentiary portion of the hearing. Will those parties making an appearance please come up to the microphone, make sure it is on, and state your name, address, and whom you represent so that the court reporter can enter this information into the record. The court reporter would also appreciate receiving your business card if you have one with you in order to facilitate correspondence. So first, Division of Water Rights, Prosecution Team, Kenneth Petrozelli.
Kenneth Petrozelli for the Division of Water Rights.
Okay. Oh, in the interest of time, yeah, please queue up. And I had that order, the 1 through 9. Thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. And then next is Marble Mountain Ranch, NMFS, DFW, Karuk, Old Man River, Klamath River Keeper, C-SPA, and PCFFA.
Good morning. Barbara Brenner on behalf of Marble Mountain Ranch, Doug and Heidi Cole. Churchwell White is the law firm, 1414 K Street, 3rd floor, Sacramento, 95814.
Thank you.
He has my card.
Great.
Christopher Kiefer with NOAA's Office of General Counsel for the National Marine Fisheries Service, 501 West Ocean Boulevard, Suite 4470, Long Beach, California, 90802.
Thank you.
Good morning. Stephen Puccini, and seated behind me, Nathan Vogely for the Department of Fish and Wildlife, 1416 9th Street, Sacramento, 95819.
Thank you.
95814, excuse me.
Oh, yeah. Make sure you get that zip code right. Thank you.
Hi again, Drevitt Hunt. I'm with Lawyers for Clean Water here on behalf of the Crook Tribe. My address is 1004A O'Reilly Avenue, San Francisco, California, 94129.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Conrad Fisher for Old Man River Trust, P.O. Box 751, Somes Bar, California, 95568. Somes, S-O-M-E-S. I see you shaking. B-A-R, separate word.
We're going to hear more about that place.
The attorney for Klamath Riverkeeper is not here. Would you like his name and address, or you want to save that?
That would be fine. I'm okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Paul Kybel, who will be here tomorrow, K-I-B-E-L, 2140 Shattuck Avenue, Suite 801, Berkeley, California, 94704.
Thank you for that. And C-SPA or PCFFA? That's okay, right? They'll introduce themselves later. Okay. All right, very good. All right, at long last, opening statements, testimony, cross-examination, and acceptance of evidence. We will now hear the prosecution's team's opening statement and direct testimony from Joey Howard, followed by any cross-examination in the order I previously identified. Redirect and recross-examination of Mr. Howard may then be permitted. If time permits, prior to the lunch break, we will hear Marble Mountain Ranch's opening statement, followed by direct testimony of their witness. But we'll see how the time goes. So as soon as actually at this point, we're having folks come up. Okay, so prosecution team and Mr. Howard. And then our hearing team, please assist folks as to where they should sit. And before we begin, we're going to, everybody who comes up has to swear to the oath. So at this time, Mr. Howard, will you please stand and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth? And if so, answer, yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Counsel, you may proceed, and thank you for sticking to this proposed schedule.
So my understanding is that I present my opening statement first. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that is. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. Okay. Yes, please do as I read into the record.
So, yes, please. I thought it was.
Times like this, do you feel PowerPoint makes you feel powerless and pointless? Not always, though. Thank you for your patience.
And all right.
Don't worry, your time hasn't started yet.
Somebody has to go first.
Exactly.
So I'll be asking for the next slide. So, okay. Good morning. My name is Ken Petrozelli. I am an attorney with the Office of Enforcement and represent the prosecution team. We are here because the diverters, Douglas and Heidi Cole and Marble Mountain Ranch, have diverted and continue to divert water in violation of Article 10, Section 2 of the California Constitution and Section 100 of the Water Code, which both provide that water rights are limited to using water that is reasonably necessary for beneficial use and shall never extend to the waste, unreasonable use, unreasonable method of use, or unreasonable method of diverting water. State board regulations refer to this collectively as the misuse of water, and it's much less of a mouthful. We requested the board adopt an order finding the diverters have misused water and continue to misuse water. We further request that the board order corrective actions with a time schedule to eliminate the misuse. Next slide. Marble Mountain Ranch is a commercial guest ranch. They offer activities such as horseback riding, hiking, whitewater rafting, kayaking, sport shooting, and fly fishing. MMR is owned and operated by the family of Douglas and Heidi Cole. During the peak summer season, with seasonal staff, there may be up to 50 people at the ranch and 500 with a fire crew. The ranch has 6 permanent residents. Next slide. MMR is located at Highway 96 in Soames Bar in Siskiyou County. The POD is located on Stanshaw Creek, a tributary to the Klamath River, about 3/4 of a mile from Highway 96 on U.S. Forest Service property. They divert up to 3 CFS and convey that water through an unlined ditch about a half mile to MMR. There they use water for consumptive uses such as irrigation and domestic use, but mostly for hydropower. The hydropower effluent fills a pond used for recreation and fire prevention, and then discharges to Irving Creek, a downstream tributary to the Klamath River. Next slide, please. The POD and ditch were originally constructed in the late 1860s. The POD is a handmade rock wing diversion dam. The ditch has a capacity of roughly 3 CFS, but is prone to failure, causing severe erosion and discharging pollutants back into Stanshaw Creek. The POD has no fish screen and operates independent of demand, with continuous diversion year-round at the maximum rate possible, but really only limited by the capacity of the ditch. The diverters can regulate the diversion by restacking the rocks, but this is time and labor intensive. As a result, during low flow periods, the diverters have diverted all or most of the flow of Stanshaw Creek. The hydropower effluent discharged into Irving Creek causes additional erosion at the outfall. In addition, the Pelton wheel requires a minimum operating flow. As a result, during low flow periods, when the diverters fail to adequately restrict their diversion, they may divert more water than necessary for their consumptive demands, but not enough to operate the Pelton wheel. This unused water flows through the Pelton wheel, serving no beneficial use, but nonetheless causes continued erosion at the Irving Creek outfall. At high flow periods with low occupancy, the ranch may divert in excess of its demands, resulting in excess power generation. The diverters claim they need about 3 CFS to support their peak power demands. At lower flows, they rely on a diesel generator. Next slide, please. Stanshaw Creek is a tributary to the Klamath River, which was added to the Wild and Scenic River System in 1982. Next slide, please. Stanshaw Creek has a short but significant section of habitat for coho salmon below the Highway 96 crossing, including an off-channel pool located just upstream of its confluence with the Klamath River. Both juvenile coho salmon and steelhead have been documented in Stanshaw Creek. This pool is filled by cold Stanshaw Creek water when high flows in the Klamath River subside, creating a high-quality summer and winter rearing habitat for non-natal juvenile coho salmon migrating down the Klamath River corridor. The Water Quality Control Plan for the North Coast region designates Stanshaw Creek as thermal refugia and requires special protections under its thermal refugia protection policy, in addition to other protections required for implementation of water quality objectives for temperature, sediment, and other parameters. Next slide, please. The diverters divert under a pre-1914 claim of appropriation and a small domestic use registration. The registration is for a pond used for recreation and fire prevention. The two statements cover their pre-1914 claim of appropriation, which originates from an 1867 claim for about 15 CFS for mining, domestic use, and irrigation. Since then, the original property was subdivided, hydraulic mining ceased, and the amount of water put to beneficial use diminished to less than 0.66 CFS. Starting around 1965, diversion substantially increased to support hydropower. Today, the diverters claim 3 CFS. Peak consumptive use has recently been estimated at 0.183 CFS, and when supporting a fire camp, 0.235 CFS. The diverters use the remaining flow for hydropower. Next slide. In July 2013, Division Enforcement staff received a complaint alleging the diverters were dewatering Stanshaw Creek and harming public trust resources. In January 2014, Division Enforcement staff received a video documenting similar allegations. This was the video. And, oh,
Videos are always a risk on a state
All right.
system. Oh. Though I appreciate that, it takes preparation to do that.
if we can play the video, it's a great video. If not, we'll just go on to the next slide.
Right. Yeah, technical difficulties.
Okay. Can we pause it?
What does the control room say? Having any, they're conferring. We should, yeah, good. Stop the time. Very good.
And there's sound with the video too. Just for the,
Yeah, that's fine. For others who, if you're planning to have videos in your PowerPoint, you should probably confer with the audiovisual folks.
Was this also submitted as an exhibit?
yes.
Because we might be able to call it up by its exhibit number.
Yeah, it was submitted as an exhibit. If we go to the exhibit page, I can find it. I don't recall the exhibit number off the top of my head.
I would actually object to the use of this video. This is a video that hasn't been authenticated by the prosecution team. We objected to it as part of their exhibit list. It's not been taken by any of the regional board or state water board staff. It was taken by somebody else. And so we don't have it hasn't been authenticated.
Shall the
Oh,
prosecution team respond to
Yeah,
that?
well, we actually ruled on that it was part of the public record, on October 31st, so it'll be included as part of the overall record, so I have to overrule that. But it is true that it wasn't authenticated. Well, I'm,
Here we have Stanshaw Creek above the point of diversion. Here is the point of diversion. Majority of the water going down the diversion ditch. Only that which leaks going down the main channel to Stanshaw Creek and then the river. Here we see Stanshaw Creek to the right and the diversion ditch on the left. Here we can see the diversion ditch on the left, Stanshaw Creek on the right, along with a no trespassing sign on Forest Service land. Following the diversion ditch to the actual point of diversion, we see the diversion ditch on the left. I'm sorry, diversion ditch on the right, Stanshaw Creek on the left, which gets a little bit of water that leaks out of the diversion dam. Here we can see the diversion ditch, approximately 50 yards from the point of diversion. In the shot, we also see the trail used to maintain the ditch and 3 large trees that have been cut down to maintain the ditch. These are 3 of several. Here we have the diversion ditch again in a flume that would be good for measuring flow, and one of a few areas where the diversion ditch has caused mudslides into Stanshaw Creek. See the diversion ditch and repairs made on another mudslide into Stanshaw Creek. Another mudslide that hasn't been repaired or shored up. Here we see a portion of the diversion ditch that has been worked on with heavy equipment. Here we see a pipe historically used to divert water to lands initially claimed by Sam Stanshaw for mining. Here is an unused diversion ditch that is near the intersection of Highway 96 and Stanshaw Creek. Here you can see the highway through the trees. This is Stanshaw Creek, close to where it should be meeting the Klamath River. Here we see Stanshaw Creek forming a pool near its former confluence with the Klamath River. And on the left side of the pool, we see an area where the creek should be reaching the river if there was enough water coming down the creek filling the pool. There we see the Klamath River. This location should be the confluence of Stanshaw Creek and the Klamath River.
And can we get the PowerPoint back, please? Thank you. So then in December 2014, enforcement staff attended a stakeholder meeting in Orleans to discuss a recent water right report and potential grants for the diverters to improve their diversion works. At the meeting, enforcement staff were informed of fish kills in the Coldwater Pool. Division staff followed up with NMFS and the Karuk tribe to learn more about the fish kills, hydrologic conditions in Stanshaw Creek, and flows that would be necessary to protect public trust resources. Next slide. On February 12, 2015, enforcement staff from the division and the regional board conducted a site inspection. They observed the POD, ditch, and Irving Creek outfall, as well as other areas. They measured flow at different locations in the ditch system and observed evidence of failures of the ditch and erosion at the Irving Creek outfall. Next slide, please. NMFS has recommended flows for Stanshaw Creek. The flow recommendation was designed to be protective of coho salmon by preserving the Coldwater Pool at the confluence of the Klamath River. It applies to all diverters year-round. The in-stream flow recommendation requires diverters to bypass 90% of unimpaired flow. When diversions for hydropower are occurring, diverters may comply with this bypass flow by returning their hydropower tailwater back to Stanshaw Creek above the point of anadromy, so long as they bypass 2 CFS at the POD. In the course of the investigation, enforcement staff identified 2 other diverters in the Stanshaw Creek watershed. After consultation with NMFS, MMR was deemed the only diversion of significance. DFW has stated that the NMFS recommendation is scientifically sound. DFW has also issued a draft streambed alteration agreement requiring the diverters to implement the NMFS bypass flow and substantially other measures in the proposed draft order that we'll speak to briefly. On August 4, 2016, the regional board issued a cleanup and abatement order. Next slide, please. To address the diverters' water quality violations. Even with a water right, there is never a vested right to discharge waste. The diverters filed a petition for reconsideration with the state board, but the state board took no action, and the diverters have filed no legal challenges to the CAO. Since issuing the CAO, the regional board has issued 3 notices of violation. Next slide, please. Under Article 10, Section 2, and Water Code Section 100, there is never a right to misuse water or divert more water than reasonably necessary for beneficial use. The doctrine of reasonable use is self-executing. It applies all the time and to all use of water regardless of the basis of right. And it's mutable. What constitutes a reasonable use at one time may, due to changing conditions, constitute a misuse later. Statutes and regulations like the frost protection regulations for the Russian River can set per se standards of reasonableness. Next slide. A separate but related doctrine is a public trust doctrine. The protection of recreational and ecological values are among the purposes of the public trust. The public trust doctrine prevents any party from acquiring a vested right to divert or use water in a manner harmful to the interests protected by the public trust. As trustee, the state must preserve public trust property from harmful diversions whenever feasible. The public trust doctrine must conform to the doctrine of reasonable use. However, these doctrines interact because a diversion that is harmful to public trust resources can constitute a misuse of water. Next slide, please. The state board has the authority under Article 10, Section 2 to prevent the misuse of water regardless of the basis of right. Under Water Code Section 275, the state board shall take all appropriate actions to prevent the misuse of water. If an investigation indicates misuse has occurred, staff must notify the interested person and allow a reasonable amount of time for that person to either eliminate the misuse or demonstrate that no misuse has occurred. If at the end of that time the misuse is continuing, a hearing may be requested. After a hearing, the board may issue an order requiring the prevention or termination of the misuse. Next slide, please. This investigation was conducted as part of the state board's continuing authority to prevent the misuse of water. On December 3rd, 2015, staff notified the diverters it believed misuse was occurring. The diverters subsequently proposed a time schedule and milestones to eliminate the misuse by June 30, 2018. Staff then gave the diverters until then to eliminate the misuse, but this was 2 to 3 years out, and the issues with this water right have been continuing for many years. Staff did not want to revisit this in 2018 and see no progress. Instead, they sent interim deadlines based on a time schedule the diverters proposed and requested a hearing date 90 to 120 days after the first milestone. If the diverters met the milestone, parties could request a postponement. This would avoid further delay in eliminating the misuse. The milestones have not been met. Next slide, please. So for key issue 1, next slide, evidence will show misuse has occurred and continues to occur. Evidence will also show the misuse threatens public trust resources. MMR has no diversion measurement compliant with SB 88, which for them requires measurement every hour. They have no fish screen. The ditch failures discharge waste into Stanshaw Creek. hydropower effluent and sediment discharge into Irving Creek. The diverters cannot reasonably regulate their diversion to ensure all the water they divert is put to beneficial use. And neither can they regulate their diversion to avoid harming public trust resources. Next slide, please. For key issue 2, next slide. The draft order recommends a variety of corrective actions so the diverters can adequately control their diversion and avoid impacting public trust resources. The draft order also recommends actions to bring the diverters into compliance with diversion measurement and reporting requirements. Next slide, please. The other part of key issue 2 is whether an order should coordinate with requirements in the CAO. It must. The CAO is a final order. Its findings, time schedule, and corrective actions are no longer subject to review or judicial challenge. Evaluating compliance with the CAO and enforcing the CAO should be left to the regional board. If the State Water Board issues an implementation time schedule for corrective actions, it must coordinate with the CAO to avoid imposing inconsistent obligations on the diverters. The division and the regional board have worked together to coordinate their enforcement efforts on MMR since beginning the current enforcement action, because we believed that by coordinating, we could maximize the effectiveness of our respective authorities and areas of expertise for stronger, more effective, and more timely enforcement. Coordination and cooperation extended to NMFS, DFW, and the Karuk tribe. To our knowledge, this level of coordination and cooperation is unprecedented in water board enforcement. We ask that you take the same approach today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Petrozelli. At this time, there's still some time left, as we discussed. On our sequence of orderly proceedings, next will be the prosecution team's direct testimony of Joey Howard. And we've budgeted 20 minutes for this.
So the prosecution team was planning on, we were budgeting 50 minutes for our remaining witnesses. So I'm trying to keep Mr. Howard pretty brief, and I'd like to reserve my remaining, I believe I'm allowed to reserve my remaining time in my opening statement for that.
You may, thanks.
Are you asking for less than 20 minutes on the clock to?
So I want to be sure, because I know that my remaining witnesses are roughly 50 minutes. So I'm trying to keep Joey. So to stay within the total for our hour, I'd like to keep Joey at 10. He's an adverse witness, even though he's a very nice gentleman. So I may need a little latitude with him. I'll ask for that if I need it. Just for some of the people here who don't necessarily understand the technical description of an adverse witness.
Okay, we'll put 10 minutes on the timer.
So, Mr. Howard, starting out, I'd like to ask you about some of your professional background. Can you state your name, please?
My name is Leonard Joseph Howard.
Okay. And are you the principal for Cascade Stream Solutions, LLC?
I am.
And can you state the address for that business, please?
2704 Clay Creek Way, Ashland, Oregon, 97520.
Okay. And can you briefly summarize your education and training?
I have a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from UC Irvine. I have a master's degree from UC Davis. My master's work was river engineering and fluvial geomorphology.
Okay. Do you have any professional licenses, and can you state those?
I'm registered as a professional engineer in both Oregon and California, and I've held those licenses for over 20 years now.
Okay, thank you. And is it correct that you primarily perform engineering services for, restoration projects?
Correct.
Okay.
Fish passage and fish screen and restoration, yes.
Okay, thank you. And do you perform a significant amount of work in the MMR region?
I do. I would say about 50% of my projects are within Siskiyou County.
Okay, and have you been out to MMR?
Yes, I have.
Okay, about how many times?
I don't know this is the exact number, but I believe I've been out there about 5 times.
Okay, so roughly total, how much time would you estimate?
I spent the night out there one night, so worked, I would say that probably on the ground, I would guess that I've been out there for over 20 hours.
Okay. So I'd like to ask you about the Cascade Stream Solutions technical report. It's Exhibit 82 from the prosecution team. And could we cue that up? So did you prepare this report?
Yes, sir.
And what was the purpose of this report?
It was to assist Martha Lanahan as part of a coho enhancement grant that was executed through the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and we were trying to identify the amount of water that was currently being put to beneficial use.
And was also part of the purpose of this water right report to identify a water right to then support additional grant fundings that the Coles could use to improve their diversion works?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what were some of the sources of information for your report?
There were numerous sources. They
I'll be actually.
Okay.
I apologize. I'll be a little briefer. Did a substantial amount of the information for the report come from Mr. Cole or people associated with Mr.
Correct.
Cole? Okay. So in the report, I think this is your exact statement. It's on page 6. You state that the amount diverted typically varies with available stream flow independent of demand. What do you mean by that?
I meant that, to my understanding from Mr. Cole, they maintain the diversion dam during high winter flows. They may try to take the dam down so that there is not substantial flow going down the ditch and damaging it, but otherwise they would maintain that dam in place, and it would divert, for the most part, all the flow that did not overtop or seep through.
Okay. So if they had less demand, they didn't just, turn a switch and
Correct.
lower their diversion. They just
To the
kept
best
on
of my
going.
knowledge,
Okay.
correct. That is correct.
And I'd like to ask you about their hydropower diversion too. Do they measure their power generation?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay. Do they measure their power consumption?
To the best of my knowledge,
Okay.
no.
They generate power with a Pelton wheel?
Correct.
Okay. Does a Pelton wheel have a minimum operating threshold?
It's my belief that it does.
Okay. Do you know roughly what it is?
No, I don't, but
Okay.
I believe that it's probably about 20 kilowatts.
Okay. Do you know roughly what the minimum flow is to operate that?
My understanding was that it requires approximately, and I might have this number off by a few tenths, but about 2.3 to 2.5 CFS to provide enough power to operate the ranch when there are guests present.
Okay. And when they have lower power demands, do they, say, restrict their diversion to limit generation to what they actually need at that time?
It's my understanding that when they have a lower demand, they generate heat with the water to burn off that extra energy.
Okay. So since they have difficulty regulating their diversion, when you were out doing your visits, did you ever observe them diverting more than they needed for their use at the time, but less than the operating threshold of the Pelton wheel?
I did. On one visit they were running their diesel generator, and so they were diverting, I guess, the amount of water, but it wasn't sufficient to power their operations. So at the time, they were unable to both generate power and combine the power with the diesel generator with the hydropower, if that makes sense. And so it's a binary system in the sense that if there's not sufficient hydropower, then they no longer run the hydropower and they just run the diesel generator. They were diverting water for both consumptive use, for domestic and for other uses, and feeding their pond, and the excess water was going to Stanshaw Creek, and they were not
So
generating.
was the excess water going to Stanshaw Creek?
Oh,
or
I'm
to
sorry.
Irving Creek?
Thank you for correcting me, Irving.
Okay, so it's not an interconnected system.
The return flows do not
So,
return.
excuse me, the power system is not interconnected.
That's, if by that, they are separate systems where you can only have one source of generation, power generation.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask you about the quote from the electrician. I think it's Exhibit WR 157 on page 84. Do you recall whether this would have been an interconnected system?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to respond to this. Oh, about Pavel's?
Yes.
Okay, so my understanding, and I guess I'm not sure I'm using the proper definition of interconnected, although I can see it right there, is that we were, at the time, what we were trying to do is combine the power sources so that you could use both sources at the same time and add that to a grid.
So it would operate together with the hydro and solar, the battery, and the propane generator. So
Yes, sir.
yeah, and would this type of system probably allow them to divert water at a lower overall rate and still meet their power demands?
Yes, that was the point of that.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to ask you about the 6-inch pipe project. Do you recall this project?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you perform engineering work for that project?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And is it correct that the 6-inch pipe size was chosen because it was considered sufficient for their consumptive use demands?
That's correct.
Okay, but not their hydropower?
That is correct.
Okay. And this would have been funded through a grant?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It was funded, to the best of my knowledge. It
Okay.
was funded, and then we pulled the grant.
Okay, and I'd like to ask you about the construction characteristics of the pipe. Would it have included a fish screen?
Yes, we did have a passive
Okay.
fish
And a
screen.
diversion control mechanism?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and could this mechanism have been controlled remotely from the ranch?
The mechanism as we had devised it was not. It was a manual valve,
Okay, so they actually would have had to go out
and
Okay.
turn it on, turn it off.
okay. And did you refine the consumptive use estimates for the 6-inch pipe from what you did in the initial Cascade Stream Solutions report that was done for the Linehan?
I did. I worked with, yes, I did.
Okay, and I'd like to ask you about exhibit, and that's reflected and that was through correspondence with Mr. Skylar Anderson?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about WR 177. Actually, I see we're
Yeah, we're right at 10 minutes now.
I'd like just a moment.
Okay.
Do you recall the revised numbers for this demand calculation? Was it roughly
So we'll reset the clock.
Okay, thank you.
And then keep going.
Okay.
Do you want 5 minutes?
I'd only like maybe a couple minutes.
Okay, so 2.
Okay. So, and do you recall that the number for consumptive use, peak use, under normal conditions was roughly 0.183 CFS.
Yes, sir.
And if they were hosting a fire crew, 0.235.
Yes, sir.
And that was consumptive uses, domestic irrigation.
That's correct.
Okay. And for peak use? Peak use, so summer season?
Yes.
Probably, okay. So would a smaller pipe than 6 inches have been sufficient for this demand?
In my opinion, it would be problematic because you could get that flow through there, but it would require allowing, this can get difficult, but it's a siphon effect through the pipe. And in that setting, I think that would be extremely challenging and not fair to the water user.
Was this for the 0.18, 0.235
Yes, sir.
amount, or for the amount that it was revised from?
It was for the, we could have gotten the, the higher amount of about a quarter CFS through that. So
Okay. All right, so those are my questions for Mr. Howard.
Okay, and we want to allow then cross-examination, is that right? Yep, so that's the next step. So I want to afford Marble Mountain Ranch the opportunity to cross-examine the witness.
Good morning.
All right, good morning. We're going to switch your name tag out there.
I didn't even know it was there.
We run a tight ship. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. Hi, Joey.
Hello.
Joey, when you first came to Marble Mountain Ranch, was the Coles working cooperatively with you?
Yes.
When did you visit Marble Mountain Ranch?
I don't recall the exact dates, but I believe the first time was about 2014.
And do you remember each time period? Do you remember? Can you give me just some sense of when you were there, the dates, or at least some sense of the time periods?
Okay. I went during their off season, so they didn't have guests. I believe I went in probably the spring and the fall. And
Of 2014?
Of 2014. I also had attended I believe in 2015 before I stopped working on the physical solutions. And I had gone there another time to do a survey. We did a profile of the ditch. So I apologize, I don't have a...
And each time you were there, the Coles cooperated with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Answered all your questions?
Yes.
Provided any information you needed?
To the best of their ability, yes.
Did you participate in the stakeholder process that was ongoing for over 20 years?
I did.
Did the Coles participate in that process as well?
Yes.
Voluntarily came to the meetings?
To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Was ever a physical solution concluded by the stakeholder process?
At one time, Will Harling of Mid-Klamath Watershed Council and I worked together. We developed a 6-inch pipe solution that was debatable as to whether it was going to be the end solution or not, but we did come up with a measure, and then the scope changed or continued to change, and I left the project.
Did that 6-inch pipe was grant funded, correct?
That was correct.
And what were the conditions on that grant funding? Do you recall?
I don't recall all the conditions, but I believe that locked the Marble Mountain Ranch into that would all that would be paid for was the 6-inch pipe, and that if they wanted, I think they might have had to give up their right to divert additional water for power or install additional pipe, but I could be mistaken about that.
So is your best recollection that the grant funding was contingent upon the Coles giving up a majority of their water right?
It was my understanding that they were going to be putting water to beneficial use and consumptive use and no longer diverting the amount that they were using for hydropower. Whether that's giving up their water right or not, that's for others to decide.
Okay. But that was certainly a contingency.
That was my understanding, but again, I'm just the guy who calculates things.
Do you have any idea or rough estimate for the costs associated with the permitting, design, and construction work for the return of water used for hydroelectric power generation back to Stanshaw Creek?
We looked at it and just did rough numbers, but it was quite expensive because it dealt with putting water down a Caltrans right-of-way that also had a fiber optic line and had bedrock. And so it wouldn't be surprising to see that it was in excess of several $100,000, probably a minimum of $500,000.
It wouldn't be surprising it'd be in excess of $1 million.
That would seem, I don't have the information to say, but it could be that much, I guess.
Why did you leave the project?
I did not feel like the project was meeting the intent of the grant, which was to provide a mutually beneficial solution that would assist the habitat needs as defined by others and the needs of Marble Mountain Ranch. And so I terminated my contract, and I did not accept any money for any of the work that I did following my work with Martha Lanahan.
Did you review the regional board's cleanup and abatement order at some point?
I did.
Did you find it possible to comply with that order?
Given the conditions and the money that we had to deal with, I did not see a way that I could assist with that.
Are you aware of any release of the diverted water off the ditch and back into Stanshaw Creek as part of the ditch system?
Yes, there are areas where water returns.
Did you ever measure the Pelton wheel capacity?
I did not take a physical measurement of the Pelton well capacity. I did measure the ditch flow with Mr. Cole while the Pelton well wheel was operating, and I believe we measured it to be slightly over 2.5 CFS.
Okay. Did you have any idea the cost of creating the interconnected energy system that was described earlier by you?
I did see estimates from Pavel. His company's called The Electrician. And then I also saw one by a gentleman by the name with the first name Hal, but I forget his last name. And in general, those estimates were in the order of about 500,000 or more.
500,000 or more?
Yeah, about there.
I don't have anything further.
All right, thank you, Counselor. Next, for cross-examination, would National Marine Fisheries Service, do you have any questions for the witness? Thank you. Next, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. No questions. Thank you. CORRECTIVE Tribe. Thank you. Old Man River Trust. Yes, please approach the bench, and then we'll switch out the nameplate.
Thank you, Joey. I just want to reaffirm you did you or did you not calculate electricity needs and consumption in your report?
I calculated the potential to generate power. However, there are some, and stop me if I'm going too far into this, but there's a couple things. One is there's just a basic calculation where you can assume efficiencies for a Pelton wheel. But there's also things in terms of the grid and the efficiency of the grid. By the way, I'm not an electrical engineer. I can calculate hydropower, but in terms of the electrical stuff, that is beyond my expertise.
Okay, so like home power needs or the needs to meet specific needs in specific buildings, you did not?
I did not. We did make an estimate of those. However, it's also the efficiency of the grid that was commented by other professionals that limited, so basically you would lose power through that system.
And you just said we did make an estimate of those. When I was referring to uses in home, was that, who was we?
It was Will and I believe Pavel and we made an estimate. We didn't publish any of that. We didn't report on that.
Okay. And was your evaluation confined to systems that rely on the current point of diversion, or did you evaluate alternatives such as hydro systems that use Moorhead and the higher point of diversion, or such as solar, or was it limited to current point of diversion?
It was, the short answer is it was limited to the power consumption, how much power was independent of the source of the power. However, you had requested that we look at if we moved the point of diversion upstream so that we could generate more head. And I looked at it, and I respectfully thought that it would be too challenging. Not to say that it wouldn't be, but in my opinion, it was too challenging due to the nature of the stream and the fact that we would have to cut in a new route for that water, or for that line to go.
So you ruled that option out?
We did rule that option out, yes.
Based on having to cut out the hillside, based on
a few things. One is that that stream, in my opinion, is subject to debris flows. And so moving up in the system, it would be expensive to do, was one. Two, there were some permitting issues with the Forest Service that I'm not involved in the permitting, but it was relayed to me by others that would be a challenge. And then we would have to find a place to put that line, and we would have to somehow get that line down the steep canyon.
Okay. So for the solution you did evaluate, wouldn't you have also had to attain permitting and put a line and kind of a lot of those same things?
I'm not an expert on permitting. I just provide support. So it was my understanding at the time, and I could be wrong, was that basically they already had a right. So the permits were really mainly based on erosion control, best management practice permits. There was a 1600 permit that involves alteration to stream bed or bank, and some other issues, but the path to permitting, as I understood it, and again, I could be mistaken, was going to be simplified by using the current point of diversion.
Okay. So we've established that you ruled out higher point of diversion. How about solar? Did you evaluate solar potential?
That was going to be part of the solution. That I terminated my contract.
Okay.
So basically I wasn't paid, and I did not issue any documents with my stamp on them associated with that. But we were looking at that, and that was basically what we were planning on doing.
So you were planning to evaluate maybe a standalone solar or just integrated with hydro solar?
At the time, based on what I understood we could do without returning flow back to Stanshaw, it was going to be primarily standalone solar.
Okay. And the final question, who...
May I correct that?
Yes,
one
of
moment?
course.
So there would be other sources too, like a propane generator and some other things, but there would be no hydropower in that.
Thank you. And in this huge process, who determined what questions you answered?
That's one of the reasons why I terminated the contract, is it became difficult to understand what our objective was going to be and who was defining that. So originally, I believe we were trying to work cooperatively with both the Coles as well as the state, and then with some direction from Mid-Klamath Watershed Council.
Thank you, Joey.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next, does Klamath Riverkeeper have any questions? Maybe they're not here. And Sea Spa? No questions. Thank you. And Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen Association? No. Okay, at this point, I wanted to ask council, do you have any redirect testimony you would request from the prosecution team? And offer anyone to do recross? Marble Mount? No? Okay, because there's no redirect. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. Well, we seem to be doing pretty well on schedule. I'm going to propose that we keep moving, and that we would have Marble Mountain Ranch's opening statement. Also, as part of our scheduling work, we're going to have direct testimony from Steve Kramer as part of this. And so it would be first your opening statement, as the prosecution team had done, and then we'll have Mr. Kramer come. So, Mr. Howard, thank you. Yes, you may go. Appreciate it. Thank you for traveling. And Ms. Brenner, please. Just make one suggestion. Sure.
I know that you don't want to change the schedule. Can you please get to the microphone before you talk? Sure. Get it on the record. Thank you. I figured my voice is pretty loud. Could I just make one suggestion? I appreciate that you've been very very cooperative and willing to work with us in our scheduling, but I'm just wondering whether prosecution doesn't want to put up another witness before I start. You've got 35 minutes. No? I mean, I'm just making a suggestion. I don't care.
Yeah, it's okay if you need a break to get ready to.
No, I'm fine.
Okay. Okay.
No,
Mr. Petrozelli?
the preference for the prosecution team would be to present all of our witnesses together.
Mhm.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
So,
That's fine.
okay, so we'll just continue with the proposed schedule.
We resigned ourselves to the proposed schedule.
Thank you for working with the hearing team.
Yeah. I'm going to make a very brief opening statement. Would like to reserve the additional time for witness testimony. I think that'll be more effective in this particular hearing.
That's, yes, you may. Oh, you okay, Mr. Petrozelli? Stop the time, please.
We'd like to verify that Mr. Howard is now done so that he may leave.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Safe travels. Okay, so are we ready?
Ready?
Okay, thank you.
So
Your
as I
opening
indicated,
statement.
I'll make a very brief opening statement. The basic facts of the Stanshot Creek system and the fishery resources at the Marble Mountain diversion of facts is pretty straightforward. You'll find it in both the fishery agencies, the state and federal fishery agencies, as well as Mr. Kramer's testimony, as well as some tribe testimony. We know pretty much how the system works and what benefits or lack of benefits there are in this particular pool. And just to suffice to say, the Marble Mountain diversion has not had a significant effect on the resources in the Stanshaw system. That's what we think the evidence will show. And that evidence, again, is not just the Coles evidence, but it's actually the fisheries evidence that helps, the fish agency's evidence that helps establish that fact. And so when you're talking about the public trust doctrine, we're talking about actual harm, preventing actual harm, not benefiting of fishery resources. And we suggest that what's going on here is an attempt to benefit the fishery resources on the back of one diverter, to the extent that it will put the one diverter out of business, given the current recommendation on the bypass flow. The clearest evidence of the fact is the NMFS 2012 to 2013 assessment of the Stanshaw pool. The Coles were diverting their full 3 CFS at that time and returning the non-consumptive use to Irving Creek. So they were not returning that non-consumptive use to Stanshaw. Yet the conclusions of the NMFS study was the fishery resources at that time were quite well. They were healthy and robust, and that's their fish report. The technical data also supports the conclusions that Stanshaw Creek is not suitable habitat to coho to spawn. So we're limited in the type of habitat that this actually provides, and that's an important fact. Nobody's disputing that fact. None of the fishery biologists are disputing that basic fact. The floodplain pool off the stream of the Klamath River near Stanshaw Creek is not naturally sustainable and requires significant human intervention to redirect the flow to the pool during low flow periods, even when the Coles limit their diversion to their domestic and consumptive use. A bypass flow of a 1 to 2 CFS without returning that flow to Stanshine Creek is sufficient to provide the habitat for the minimal use of the floodplain pool at Stanshaw Creek. The cost to return the non-consumptive use of the water is prohibitive. We just heard testimony in excess of $500,000 at a minimum. permitting alone for that project could easily reach $500,000, based on our assessment, at least $250,000 just for the permitting of the return flow. That's not talking the construction or anything else to build basically 3/4 of a mile of pipeline. Without a direct showing of the benefit or removal of harm gained by returning the flow to Stanchon Creek, there's no practical nor legal basis to require such an effort. The Coles are pegged as the bad actors in this case. To the contrary, the evidence will establish that the Coles have been cooperating for over 20 years with the stakeholder group, improving their ditch system, preventing ditch failures, replacing the World War II Pelton wheel, replacing the electrical system, and going from flood irrigation to a piped irrigation system. These and other improvements have been made to decrease power and water demands. These efforts have come at a very high cost, both financially and emotionally. The Coles have spent nearly $1 million on improving the system and defending their water right. They've upgraded and improved both the water and the electrical systems and complied with regulatory requirements. The emotional stress on not knowing what is coming next and from what agency has been tremendous. It's taken a major toll on the Coles, their family, and their extended family. Mrs. Cole has suffered from cancer and other health issues that the doctors have all said is directly caused by stress. Since 2015, the Coles have voluntarily decreased their flows, their diversion, to consumptive use needs only during low flow periods. So during the dry years, the dry weather flows, the Coles in fact did decrease their use. They didn't use their hydro system, and they used diesel power to power their system. In the last couple of years, they've voluntarily done just diesel in order to get through the permitting process. They've asked for permits to divert into Irving Creek. There's been no response. The 1600 permit's been held up for this process. They've really been stranglehold with the permitting process, all waiting on a determination as to their ability to use their hydropower 3 CFS. So when we say that they're bad actors since 2014 and we've had all these investigations, they've done nothing. In fact, before 2014, they've done quite a bit. Since the issuance of the order and some of these other regulatory activities, they've been hamstrung. They haven't been able to even get a response on the discharge permit. And as indicated in the record, the 1600 permit's on hold. It's all focused on whether we can afford or whether it's practical, whether it's necessary to have return flow. Instead of going to Irving Creek, we should return the flow at a cost of over $1 million, we would estimate, and for very little, if any, benefit based on our evidence. So this seems to be the core issue in this hearing. We hear ideas about solar and diesel and interconnected and more efficient energy system or electrical system. When you start digging into each one of those alternatives, the interconnected system, $500,000. Return flow, at least another $500,000. That's not counting the cost to actually put in the piped diversion and some sort of culverting or other physical solution to the top end of the diversion ditch in order to have a metering system in place. The Coles have agreed to do that. They've already agreed to do that. They've agreed to 1 to 2 CFS bypass flow. They've agreed to only consumptive use when there's not adequate water flow for hydropower. The question is, what else? They can't afford every single option that's being presented to them and required of them, and they certainly can't afford to return the flow from Stanshaw back to Stanshaw. The system's been used for years to go into Irving. The proposal to shore up the Irving outflow has been presented for over a year, close to 2 years, in order to make that a sufficient system and ensure that there's no sediment entering into Klamath or into Irving for that matter. Irving's a viable system. It too has fishery resources. There's simply no basis to find the Coles are wasting or unreasonably using their pre-1914 water right to divert up to 3 CFS from Stanshaw Creek. And there's certainly no evidence of the hearing that the public resources have been harmed by the diversions by the Coles over the years. And we'll establish that during this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, can we call up Mr. Kramer? Thank you. So we will conduct direct testimony from Steve Kramer, followed by any cross-examination in the order I previously identified. Redirect and recross-examination of the witnesses may then be permitted. And so when you're ready, would you please stand and raise your right hand, Mr. Kramer? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth? If so, answer, yes, I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may be seated. Counsel, you may proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you please state your name and address for the record?
Stephen P. Kramer. My address is 300 Southeast Arrow Creek Lane, Gresham, Oregon, 97080.
And can you briefly describe your technical background, your education?
I have a Master's of Science, Master's of Fish Biology degree, 1974. Began my career then. That's, by calculation, 43 years. I've been a practicing fisheries scientist. My first 13, 14 years was with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. I led research on the Rogue River, a watershed similar to that of the Klamath. In fact, collaborated with the Klamath team. After those 13, 14 years with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, I, in 1987, launched my own consulting firm. So that's now been in operation 30 years, offices in California, Oregon, Washington, Idaho. Our focus has been on understanding how people's actions impact fish resources. So we've looked at all kinds of environmental effects on the fish, what are the population dynamics of the fish, frequently do population modeling, and have in the past done a number of projects on the Klamath Basin. Probably the largest and most notable in the Klamath Basin was for the Bureau of Reclamation in the mid-2000s. I think it was 2000, perhaps like 8, 9, 10. I may have those years wrong, but they're approximately right, where we did population modeling for coho salmon in the Klamath Basin, including all of its tributaries and all the known places where coho were propagated naturally. So in that case, we were putting together a jigsaw puzzle of the existing information that existed. No one else had done that before, so that we could predict how operation of the water system within the Klamath Basin would affect coho and what other kinds of things could be done to improve that run.
Thank you. Were you asked to assist the Marble Mountain Ranch with the allegations against them with regard to their diversion of water from Stanshaw Creek?
I was requested by Marble Mountain Ranch to identify what the fishery values were of the Stanshaw Creek and how that might be affected by their water use.
And did you put a PowerPoint summary of your testimony together for today's hearing?
I have.
And can we just go ahead and let him walk through his PowerPoint? Would that be more efficient, I believe?
Yes, I'll allow that. Thank you.
How do I control it?
Does
Do I
it need
be
to
over
take?
there, or? Would it be easier if I stood up over there? See if it's going to work. Oh, it is. How about that? All right, so I'll just use that. And what about pointer? Use that thing?
I think the control left click will work for the pointer. No? Yeah. No.
I got this thing.
not
I
sure.
can use
I
the,
think
I can use
just
the
use the
cursor.
cursor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. First of all, let me just introduce what the evaluation process that I went through. I have submitted 2 reports already that were my written testimony. First one, I reviewed all the available information on Stanshaw Creek that was in the correspondence to Marble Mountain Ranch. That was limited in extent. And then I gathered what reports I could from the internet and whatever resources I already had available. And I completed a report that I turned in on September 29th. And I'm not exactly sure when that had to be submitted to the board, but that was submitted. Subsequent to that, and at the time we made that report, I had proposed that I would do a survey of the stream so I could look at the actual features of the stream and determine how they might influence fish production. And so we did do that stream survey on October 3rd, and then I completed a report analyzing that data that was submitted on October 30th. So both, I believe those are both in your possession. Stream assessments. First of all, let me just tell you, well, here's a four-step process. First of all, we wanted to look at the impediments to upstream passage, because we want to know, could fish get up the creek? We wanted to look at the suitable patches of spawning gravel. Is it a place where fish could actually spawn and reproduce naturally? This is in the creek. What's the rearing capacity for salmonids? And wanted to identify where we could establish a point to monitor how the depth and velocity of the stream would change as flow changed. In doing that, I recognized, first of all, that there was rules of thumb that had been applied to how much water should be diverted, and that rule of thumb is often used when there is no data. And so the idea was this data of an actual stream survey and measuring these things would give a means to calculate what a more appropriate number is. When you use a rule of thumb like 10% is the amount diverted, that is broadly cited and has a basis. It's an extremely conservative choice of how much could be diverted because it has to apply to any circumstance. But there is uniform agreement in the fisheries literature that site-specific circumstances are the right way to determine what a stream would need to have in its course in order to sustain fisheries values. So a rule of thumb is only what you use if you don't have any data. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the stream barriers that we look for. You can measure the height and the lateral distance that a fish has to jump, and also measure the depth of the pool it must jump from to determine if it's a passable barrier. It's not an absolute value unless it is extremely high jump, but it is a very reliable means to say probability that fish would be able to pass that spot. So what I've done here, I've listed 9 locations in this slide that are the locations where we found a barrier. I'll show you a couple of pictures of them that were likely to be a barrier, and we measured the height, the lateral distance the fish would have to jump, and we measured the depth of the pool where they would have to jump from in order to get over that barrier. And so starting at the top there, these are well, let me just, I guess what I would say, rather than going through all 9 of those, I would just look at the height of the jump. That's from the surface of the water to how high they have to land at the next surface of the water to be over the jump. And all of these that are listed there are 3 feet or more. Fisheries literature establishes very clearly when you do laboratory tests and you can vary the height of the jump and the depth for juvenile coho salmon, they fail to jump 30 centimeters, which is just a little over 1 foot. So these are 105 millimeter length juvenile coho, recently published Transaction American Fisheries Society in the fisheries literature, and a very carefully extensive evaluation of different jump heights. More flow, more depth did not enable them to jump any higher. But when they went down to 26 centimeters, just a little bit more, they had 3% succeed. And so as each time they reduced the height, a little more succeeded, but it went to 0 at 32 centimeters. They couldn't jump over a foot. That's for juvenile coho. For adults, the guideline that's typically used in fisheries literature, a number of studies come back to this ratio, that the depth they jump from has to be 1.25 times, that is 125% the height they have to jump. So it has to be more depth than height in order to get enough speed to pass over the obstacle. There would be some very shallow jumps that wouldn't be true of, but that's the guideline. So what you see here, these are 3-foot high jumps. Lateral distance in some cases is 0, and that's fine, but some is very great. none of these depth heights that you see in that last column compared to the height they had to jump meet the criteria. They are not good for adult passage. They're not good for juvenile passage. All of these are likely barriers. There could be some flow where a few fish get over. The one that's most significant as a natural barrier down there, it's called Unit 71. It's next to the bottom line. And that one is just right above the highway crossing. So this is clear down. If you look at the total, the 4,000 feet of these barriers, well, that upper one is still below the point of diversion. So down at 1,288 feet, down to the floodplain of the Klamath, there's a barrier that's 4.6 feet high, 7.5 feet lateral because it's over a long sloping shot of bedrock. I'll show you a photo. And others have also ruled it's impassable. And it's only 40 feet above the highway. So the highway culvert's been thought impassable, and then this is 40 feet above that. So really no opportunities above the highway. I'll point to that last one there, and I'll bring it up with photo and we can discuss it. But there's another barrier to migration as it presently stands when we were in there in October, 66 feet above the floodplain. And it's human constructed. It is not natural. Here's that first barrier that's right above the highway. You can see 4.6 vertical, but 7.5 feet lateral, and it would be a lot longer depending if you can see we've got a person standing with a stadia rod. That's an expandable rod. It's all fully metricated, so you can read the length right off of it, how far it spans a distance, and we were using it just there for perspective. But the closest jump you could make on any of these, and it probably was to that little lower pool on the left, would be 4.6 feet vertical, and it still had the 7 feet horizontal from any possible jump pool. You can see there's no jump pool in this picture. It's out of the picture to the left. This is the one that others have looked at and all agreed this is probably a barrier. And this is the lowest in the system, natural. It's right above the highway. As we went further up, just to identify, there's a couple more. Here's another one. This one, 4.6 foot vertical. It could jump straight up. There was no problem lateral, but only had a 2 foot deep pool. So it wasn't nearly deep enough to give the fish the opportunity to build speed to pass that barrier. Here's another one. This one's really problematic to pass. I'm sure it's a barrier because there's really no place to jump from. We did measure the pocket right where you see that stake reaching. It's very frothy. All kinds of tests show that they can't jump from froth, but if you give that froth pile a credit, it's 2 feet deep, and it's a very small little spot. They likely could not use that to jump from, so it's actually quite a bit higher than that if you add the other distance, but this is certainly a barrier.
And Steve, I'm going to ask you to kind of speed it up a bit so that we can make sure we get through your testimony.
Okay, thank you. I just need to touch on this one. This one is an artificial barrier, man-made, 3 feet high. What you see right in front of you, and I'm going to use this pointer. Well, I don't know if that, yeah, okay, hopefully it's. This is all a man-made rock berm. This pool is within 66 feet of the mouth of the stream. It is in view of the owner that's on the west bank. It's obviously created seasonally. It would blow out with any high flow. The closest place to get any jump out of this is less than a foot deep. From the height of that surface to this is over 3 feet high. It certainly blocks any juvenile migration during the summer. So this is where, and you'll see other places where juvenile migration upstream is also blocked by man-made structures that are not in any way related to Marble Mountain Ranch. Okay, here's what that outfall looks like as they come out from under the highway. And so it's this stretch downstream that I'm now going to talk about what we found out for survey results. And I've measured everything from the top all the way down by channel units. And here we see the point of diversion is 4,284 feet upstream from the floodplain of the Klamath. Note an error in my October 30 report, just in case you come across it. I had failed to add the 1,048 feet that was below, so I was only saying 3,236 feet, I think is what I said for the whole thing, and that was just down to the highway. There's another 1,048 below the highway, and it's that 1,000 feet that we're going to talk about now. Channel unit composition below the highway, this is where there could be potential access. 12% of that area is in pools, 3% is in riffles. Those are the two unit types that potentially could be useful to the fish. The rest of it is high velocity, complex, fast water stretches that at any flow other than extreme low flow would not be useful. The velocity is very high and not is beyond the reach of juvenile fish. There's few marginal gravel patches. I found none suitable for spawning. And then finally, the 9 barriers that I just showed you. To explain how I went ahead and estimated the capacity of this stream to rear fish, I just wanted to show you quickly that there are hard data that actually will estimate what kind of density should we expect in different types of channel units. A pool is a type of channel unit. A riffle is a shallower, faster one. But what you can see here is the pools have the highest ability to support data. This is from 19 streams on the Oregon coast. The par per meter squared is the way the density is calculated. And so if you have measurements on a pool, you have a surface area, you would expect a density, in this case, of 0.17 par per meter squared of surface area of a pool, but much less if it was a glide. There were no glides in this stretch. Rapids and riffles, and I used a value intermediate to this value on this chart right here. This is just another one. On the x-axis is the depth, and what this shows is, as you have more depth, you have more par per meter squared regardless of the unit type, except by the time you're at about 2.5 feet, which is 0.8 meters, things change. It no longer anymore doesn't provide additional value, but it starts to become a problem in riffles because they start to get too fast if they're too deep. They don't have friction, and to create a riffle is too fast at that point. Okay, so here's the actual data that we can see of what there is in that stream, and what we see on the top is Stanshaw Creek. I listed Irving Creek because then we went over and surveyed 3,000 feet of Irving Creek as well, just to get a comparison. I wanted to know, is there indications that Irving Creek has a comparable or lesser value? What happens if we put water into Irving Creek instead of Stanshaw Creek? So we needed to get a look at Irving Creek. What you see here, I want you to just look at pools because that's predominantly where the opportunity for fish rearing is, particularly for coho, which have a dominant preference for pools. Pools, on average, are 15.6 feet long and 8.4 feet wide. And when you're classifying units, if they're not more than at least one time as long as they are wide, that is, if they're wider than they're long, they're not really a unit. It's just part of the whole flowing stream. So if they're not at least one channel width long, they don't even qualify as a unit. And that's standard in fishery science. At any rate, you can get these things just barely 2 lengths, they're 2 widths wide, so 8.4 width, and they're 1.4 foot deep. Now just look down at Irving Creek. You can just see by comparison, Irving Creek is larger. It has pools that are almost double the length, another 50% more width, and at least another 50% more depth also. So they have all these traits that are much more desirable for coho production, for steelhead production, for all of those in Irving Creek. This is a picture of Irving Creek. This is just one stretch we looked up, and it should be real obvious. This is a much lower gradient than what you're going to see when we look at pictures of Stanshaw Creek. Stanshaw Creek has an average slope that ranges from 9 to 11%, far beyond the range that is useful for coho, which typically don't use anything more than 5%. You can find a few a little above that, up to 7%, but by the time you're at 9-11, there's essentially no coho production in those kind of streams. They don't have a morphology. They have too much velocity for coho. This one has less, and so it has more desirable habitat. Now just to look, I wanted to show you, without going through this giant table that I'm on now, this is the actual calculation, channel unit by channel unit, below that highway crossing in Stanshaw Creek, how many steelhead par it could support. And the reason I picked steelhead par is because they do like higher velocity, and at age 1+, they are able to swim in higher velocities. They're a little bit larger than the coho would grow before the coho leave. And we're estimating that by this method that's been used widely and is published, 36 coho par is all you could produce. And if you put the average expected survival of a coho par at age 1+ through the winter is about 50%. So if you take those 36, that you've got 18 that become ready to go to the ocean next year, and if you quite liberally allow them 10% survival, 10% of 18 fish is 1.8 returns. This stream is capable of producing, in a very good year, 1 or 2 adults. In most years, no adults. So this stream is not capable of supporting a sustainable population of steelhead, and is certainly not capable of supporting a sustainable population of coho. Very important conclusion, measured, not a theory. These are numbers and these are actual measurements. And this has been applied widely and is in published science literature. Okay, so now comes the really shocking part of what we found on that. This is as we come out onto the floodplain. And I'm going to show a couple of photos that I hope you will be able to understand. What I want to show you right here, this, where you see my cursor wiggling there, is where this thing where Stanchak Creek emerges onto the floodplain, right there. It's coming from kind of straight ahead to your left. I'm going to show you another angle of it. The main force of this channel is here to the right. There's rocks stacked in the bushes here. It's really hard to get, but there's rocks stacked here to block the flow so that it doesn't go to the right, but a whole bunch does. On the day that we were there, we measured flow at 5 CFS at the diversion. There was return flow coming through one of the first diversions down. The ditch operates so that there's overflows to allow excess flow off of it to return to Stanchak Creek. There was at least 1 or 2 CFS coming down. The first of those, there was more at another point that were returning to Stanchak Creek. So what you measure at the diversion is not what you end up at the bottom end. At least it certainly was not on the day that we made these measurements. So you probably have in the order of 6 or 7 CFS at least arriving right here. There's 2 channels going off to the left, and the creek is coming out here and tending to go straight to the Klamath. What we realize is the pond that you've seen pictures of is 45 feet at a right angle to the left here. So this stuff has got to turn around and go left across the gravel bar. And so that's why these rock berms are there. What you'll see now, we'll look at a different view. This is that same
if we
spot.
could pause for a second. Your 20 minutes have expired.
Right, we would like additional time so that Mr. Kramer can complete his testimony. We have, what, another 4 or 5 minutes?
At least.
Go ahead.
You have 11 minutes, 20 seconds left from your opening statement. Would you like to start there?
We can start by applying that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Continue.
Okay. So now this is the same view of the spot, and this is now standing over into that channel where the most flow is directed. There's a couple of boulders here that were placed in the channel, and so it's diverting stuff off to this left. Now I'm going to show you some views. I estimated right here about 1/3 of the flow is coming down this channel. 2/3 are getting diverted this other way. One of those is splitting and not showing. I'm pointing at. There's one little channel there. There's actually 2 channels directed down to the left that are created here. Now we'll look down them so you can see that they're lined. This is the upper one going off through the trees, and you can see it's lined by gravel berm, cobble and boulder berm, man-made, to direct it over to, and that in the distance is the pond. You can see from this person standing down there, the height is about 4 to 6 feet, something like that, of the pond versus at the pond, the height of the stream emerging from the channel and now entering here onto the floodplain. Here is the other channel that goes that way. And again, you can see that it's got rock berm constructed all the way along it, some stair steps, obviously, would appear to be intending to help fish move from the pond down there up the creek. Now, remember, for this distance out to over here is about 45 feet upstream, up the gravel bar from where the creek emerges from its channel. All of this water right here is flowing through the edge of the berm and going out across the gravel bar, is not entering the pond. So by the time you have all the losses that are on this bar plus the other, about 2/3 of the flow that's coming out does not reach the pond. That's by natural inclination of where the pond is and where the creek is. The amount that does reach there, you can see, is man-made. Those are man-made berms to get the water over to the pond. Here is a picture of that pond that was taken the winter after 2013 when it was enhanced. So that there was a special enhancement project to go alter the pond to make it more favorable for fish. And so we can see something's real different in this 2013 picture than there is now. I don't know what happened in between. There was a flow of over 100,000 CFS in the Klamath this last winter. That could have been the one. There may be others that were there to see it. I will show you some more pictures, but what you need to look at right now is where does the water come out of the pond? Here we're looking at this one channel going in, and I just showed you now there's multiple channels that are built up going in. And I'll now show you the outflow, but there's a giant rock berm built up wherever the outflow is. I assume it must be right about this location, but it looks quite a bit different than this now. So here's me standing what I'm standing in is the Klamath River. This is the backwater of the Klamath River. This rock berm plugs that pond. The pond is out of sight, but directly behind this rock berm. And all of the flow coming out of the pond is going through the crevices of the rocks. And again, there's been previous estimate that whatever it used to be could have been maybe 2 CFS would get you to overflow. There was times where it was slightly less than 2 and it just was like an inch or 2 from the top. Well, obviously here we've got in total probably 7 CFS reaching the floodplain, and it's not close to coming over the top there, and it won't because it's coming through the berm that is human constructed. And all that other stuff that I showed you coming through is substantially out of your picture to the right now. Other flow is coming out across the gravel bar to the right where it's all natural. The problem is you've got the flow of the Klamath River shooting sideways across the front of this, and floods will reconfigure that gravel bar. Restoration, our firm does a lot of restoration projects. Restoration is an inexact science, and it has to deal with highly variable environments. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. There's a tremendous backlog of examples of restoration projects that did not live up to their expectations. And what I see now is this one is not living up to expectations. And I'll show you some more in the snorkel. But the key thing here is that this is upstream passage now is blocked by human-constructed rock berms, absolutely independent of natural flow. What this would look like without those, I'm not sure. I don't know that any flow would even get to the pond without the berms under today's setting. Maybe some would. But at any rate, all we've got is all these rock berms. Here's the pond itself. Now I'm standing on top of what you were just looking at there and looking at. Here's our snorkeler. We had him snorkel very slowly to not disturb fish. If you could see it more clearly, closer up, you can actually see the bottom here. Visibility is very good. There's woody debris established in this that provides cover. That's here in the front. There's an island over to the left, and then it goes quite a bit back to the left. He covered the entire thing very slowly twice, 10 minutes in between. And he had separate counts each time because we wanted to know how repeatable is the count. And so I have those listed there on the slide. First run through, 9 steelhead. These are age 0+, so these are just young of the year. And there was 2 coho on his first run through. Waited 10 minutes, went back, swim through. His count varied, which you would expect. You don't see everything on one of these, but he was going, being very careful. So it's very close. He got 15 steelhead zeros and 1 steelhead 1+, but no coho. So he, if you just assume that perhaps that he was only 50% efficient, then you could say, well, this for coho-wise, maybe there was somewhere less than 5 coho, maybe there was 30 steelhead in the whole pond this year. Those are very small numbers compared to historically. Let me just quickly tell you about some of the numbers that I compared that to because it really puts perspective. That had been reported previously, and in 2000, second, I want to get my years right. Okay. In 2005, the Crook tribe had reported 156 coho. These are just coho. They also had a whole large number of steelhead, and those are just listed in a side column in a table that was submitted for evidence. And so this is where I found it. In 2008, they had 130 coho in there. In 2010, 55. In 2012, a study that actually did mark recapture estimated the full number there, 120. And then immediately following the enhancement project that I showed you that winter picture, there's a report. They said they counted, or they estimated, I don't know how they did it, 105 in February of 2016. So now, move ahead. I've only found 2 other estimates. The ones we made, we found 5. And so this is since that project. And then in 2014, Crawl, I believe it was, estimated, did a project there. It might have been Whitmore. Anyway, there was a study done, and it's in evidence, estimated 10. So we've been nowhere close to those numbers after the enhancement project. I don't know why they couldn't all get there. If it was the rock berms or what else happened, if somebody has other data, that, it hasn't been presented in evidence, and I don't have it. So it appears that this is performing poorly, in spite of the fact for the last 2 years that the Marble Mountain Ranch has not diverted water during the summer. It's complied during the summer low flow with not diverting water, except for their benefit, their what do you call that?
Consumptive use.
Consumptive use, thank you. It's not the hydro use, it's the consumptive use part. That's the only thing they've diverted. So substantially more flow coming down, and yet very different and much lower performance than the past. Here's, just so you look at Irving Creek, here's what happens when it enters onto the floodplain. It looks a lot like what part of the Stanshaw Creek looks like. When we entered out of Irving Creek onto the floodplain, immediately it branches out across all the boulders, and you've got this complete braided channel just going in all kinds of direction. But even there, naturally, there was a floodplain pool formed. And upon approaching this, we didn't expect to find one, but there it was. It's natural. And fish darted away as we approached. We weren't there with snorkel gear and couldn't go do any estimate, but it would form some of its own. Just so you know, now just thinking about Irving Creek, its pools are larger, deeper, its riffles are deeper, and the estimate, I didn't complete the estimate, but just by looking at the data on it, its capacity would be somewhere in the order of 5 to 7 times the capacity of Stanshaw Creek to produce something. And whatever's in Stanshaw Creek, remember, it's not reproducible, but the floodplain pond would be. The floodplain pond has value, and those numbers show it. It's just that what they've done to it now, it's not performing. And it's not flow that it's lacking for. It's got problems for fish getting to it. So here's just some Stanshaw Creek riffle. I wanted to show you the velocity changes as flow goes up. So more flow causes more trouble for fish in the stream. So what we did here, first the upper table, there's 10 increments across the stream. We measure the depth and the velocity, each of those increments. 3 feet per second is a reasonable velocity for juveniles, but all the depths, note, are under 6 inches. They're under half of a foot, 0.5 feet, 6 inches. Juvenile salmonids of any size are very vulnerable to bird predation and mammals, whatever. They will strongly avoid depths under 6 inches. And so if you don't have 6 inches, they feel totally vulnerable. They will avoid that. So this riffle doesn't work at low flow. But look what happens to the velocities. And I use this because remember that when I gave you the versions before, 3% of the area was riffle and 12% was pool. And those were the only channel units that really could produce fish. This is one of the shallowest riffles there, but it was where we could get to it to do these measurements. Within, there was a flow event just shortly after this. Then we got the measurements again, and you can see the depth had increased only slightly. Most of it's still under 6 inches. There's one that was 0.7 feet. And the velocities, if you look at the second half of this thing, there it is. Over here, the whole second half of those 10 is now up 4, and even here's one at 5.9. So you're getting a whole lot of velocity across this riffle. It's getting deeper, but too fast.
And Steve, we're going to have to get you to get to your conclusions.
Here they are. Okay, here's the conclusions. So what do we see from all that? Number one, stream morphology and the habitat suitability.
Sorry to interrupt, but we hit another break in time.
Okay. So we have a couple of options. If you'd like to move to transfer time from your other witnesses, you have that option, or we can very quickly wrap.
I think you got to your conclusions, correct? So we should be, what, another minute?
Right, I'm just on the last 2 slides that have the conclusions.
So if we could just have 1 more minute.
I'll allow it.
Thank you.
Okay, stream morphology and the habitat suitability for salmonids is low, and it's primarily driven by the 9 to 11% stream gradient. It was predictable before you even went out and measured all the habitat. Upstream passage is blocked within 40 feet of the highway naturally, and we looked at that. The habitat is not suitable for coho, and it's capable of supporting less than 50 steelhead par in the stream. This is in the stream portion. at moderate summer flows. Higher flows will start to increase velocities where it doesn't work. Higher flows actually in a very steep channel become a problem for the fish. Capacity likely declines as flow increases due to those increasing velocities. So more flow is not necessarily good when you're in a 9 to 11% gradient. The floodplain pond is capable of providing cool water refuge through the summer, and it's also good for high flow refuge in the winter, spring, when for juvenile salmonids, and that would be, at least in some years, it's dependent on what happens by shaping of that gravel bar by the Klamath River, not by Stanshaw Creek. Man-made rock berms intended to divert flow, direct flow, and increase the depth in the pond also created substantial impediment to upstream access by the juvenile salmonids to both the pond and the stream. Floodplains are dynamic, and the function of Stanshaw Pond as a refuge is likely to vary widely between years without annual human intervention. A number of others in the Klamath Basin have made the same statement, that they have found they work great some years and not others. In this case, that whole arrangement is heavily influenced by the Klamath River. Monitoring data indicate that Stanshaw Pond likely functioned more effectively as a refuge before the habitat enhancement in 2013. Because once those fish left in the winter, now it's summer 2014, and the first look at it, there was only 10 fish in there, 10 coho. Flows of 1 CFS into that pond, several of the years there was measurements found on a Crook Tribe data table. 1 CFS often was measured entering the pond in past summers when numbers of fish were present and doing well. That suggests that's been tested, field tested, it works for water quality in the pond. Is there more value to gain in Irving Creek? That's an open question. Water in Irving Creek is valuable for fish. It does not lose all of its function if it goes to Irving Creek, I can tell you that.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. And before we break for lunch, or you want to continue? Okay. Yeah, the next order of proceeding is to do a cross-examination, but that could take an hour or more, depending on folks, the different parties' list of questions and the detail we'll get into. So it is now 12:10 according to that clock. This presents a logical point to break for lunch. We'll take 60 minutes, as we said earlier, and we'll return here and recommence at 1:10 p.m. And thank you for adhering to those parameters, and I'll see you at 1:10.